Welcome to History Explained, where we illuminate the past to better understand our present. I'm your guide to your daily journey through the past to empower the future. Today is Wednesday, July 2nd, 2025. As we do every Wednesday, we're exploring a major global event that shaped the course of world history. Today, we turn our attention to the Cuban Revolution, the armed conflict that lasted from 1953 to 1959 and brought Fidel Castro and the communist government to power in Cuba. This revolution not only transformed Cuban society but also had profound implications for Cold War politics, Latin American history, and U.S. foreign policy. What makes the Cuban Revolution particularly significant is how it established the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere, creating a Soviet ally just 90 miles from the United States. This dramatic shift in the balance of power intensified Cold War tensions and influenced revolutionary movements throughout Latin America. So let's explore this pivotal revolution, examining the conditions that sparked it, the key figures who led it, the dramatic events that brought victory, and its lasting impact on Cuba and the broader world. To understand the Cuban Revolution, we must first examine the conditions in pre-revolutionary Cuba under the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. Batista first came to power through a military coup in 1933 and ruled Cuba, either directly or through puppet presidents, for most of the period until 1959. Cuba in the 1950s was characterized by extreme inequality and corruption. While Havana boasted luxury hotels, casinos, and nightclubs that attracted wealthy Americans, most Cubans lived in poverty. Rural areas lacked basic services like electricity, clean water, and healthcare, while unemployment remained chronically high. The Cuban economy was heavily dependent on sugar exports and dominated by American interests. U.S. companies controlled much of Cuba's sugar industry, utilities, and infrastructure. This economic dependence created resentment among Cubans who felt their country was being exploited by foreign interests. Batista's government was notoriously corrupt, with officials taking bribes from American mafia figures who operated casinos and other businesses in Havana. Political opposition was suppressed through censorship, imprisonment, and violence, creating widespread discontent among the population. The spark that ignited the revolution came on July 26, 1953, when a young lawyer named Fidel Castro led an attack on the Moncada Barracks in Santiago de Cuba. The assault was a military failure, with most of the attackers killed or captured, but it established Castro as a symbol of resistance to Batista's regime. Castro was captured and put on trial, where he delivered his famous, "History will absolve me," speech defending his actions and outlining his vision for a reformed Cuba. Though sentenced to 15 years in prison, Castro was released in 1955 as part of a general amnesty. Following his release, Castro went into exile in Mexico, where he organized the 26th of July movement, named after the date of the Moncada attack. In Mexico, he met Argentine revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara, who would become one of his closest allies and most effective military commanders. On December 2, 1956, Castro, Guevara, and 80 other revolutionaries landed in Cuba aboard the yacht Granma. The landing was nearly disastrous, with most of the expeditionaries killed or captured by Batista's forces. Only about 20 survivors, including Castro and Guevara, escaped to the Sierra Maestra mountains. From their mountain stronghold, the revolutionaries began a guerrilla war against Batista's forces. Initially, their numbers were tiny, but Castro proved to be a skilled propagandist and military strategist. He cultivated relationships with foreign journalists who brought international attention to the revolutionary cause. The revolutionaries' strategy emphasized winning popular support rather than simply defeating government forces militarily. They established schools and medical clinics in areas under their control, demonstrating their commitment to social reform and contrasting their approach with Batista's corrupt government. Castro's movement gained strength throughout 1957 and 1958 as more Cubans joined the rebellion. Urban resistance networks supported the guerrillas with supplies and intelligence, while Batista's forces became increasingly demoralized by their inability to defeat the rebels. The revolution's success was aided by Batista's own mistakes. His FARC's brutal tactics against civilians turned more Cubans against the government, while corruption and incompetence undermined military effectiveness. The dictator's reliance on torture and repression only strengthened opposition to his rule. International factors also played important roles. The United States initially supported Batista but eventually imposed an arms embargo as his position became untenable. Meanwhile, Castro carefully avoided revealing his communist sympathies, presenting himself as a democratic reformer seeking to restore constitutional government. The turning point came in 1958 when Batista launched a major offensive against the rebels in the Sierra Maestra. The offensive failed completely, with government forces suffering heavy casualties and many soldiers defecting to the revolutionaries. This defeat demonstrated that Batista's military could not defeat the guerrillas. Following this victory, Castro's forces launched their own offensive, advancing from the mountains toward major cities. Che Guevara led a successful campaign in central Cuba, while Castro's brother Raúl opened a second front in eastern Cuba. Government resistance collapsed rapidly as morale disintegrated. On January 1, 1959, Batista fled Cuba for the Dominican Republic, taking with him millions of dollars from the Cuban treasury. Revolutionary forces entered Havana triumphantly, with Castro arriving several days later to enormous crowds celebrating the victory. The immediate aftermath of the revolution saw dramatic changes in Cuban society. The new government implemented extensive land reforms, nationalized foreign-owned businesses, and launched literacy and healthcare campaigns. These changes improved conditions for many poor Cubans but alarmed wealthy Cubans and foreign investors. Castro initially appointed moderate politicians to key government positions and promised to hold democratic elections. However, he gradually consolidated power, removing moderates and installing his supporters in important positions. By 1961, Castro had openly declared Cuba a socialist state aligned with the Soviet Union. The revolution's success had immediate international consequences. The United States broke diplomatic relations with Cuba in 1961 and imposed a trade embargo that continues today. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 and the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. For Latin America, the Cuban Revolution served as both inspiration and warning. Revolutionary movements across the region adopted Castro's guerrilla tactics, while established governments feared similar uprisings. The revolution contributed to decades of political instability and conflict throughout Latin America. The revolution's social achievements were significant despite economic challenges. Cuba developed world-class healthcare and education systems, achieving some of the highest literacy rates and lowest infant mortality rates in Latin America. These successes earned international recognition even from critics of the regime. However, the revolution also came with substantial costs. Political freedoms were severely restricted, with dissent suppressed and many Cubans imprisoned for opposing the government. Hundreds of thousands of Cubans fled to the United States and other countries, creating a large exile community. The revolution's economic impact was mixed. While social services improved dramatically, economic growth stagnated due to mismanagement, U.S. sanctions, and the inefficiencies of central planning. Cuba's dependence on Soviet subsidies created new forms of economic vulnerability. Castro's leadership style became increasingly authoritarian over time. While he retained significant popular support, especially among rural and working-class Cubans, opposition was not tolerated. The revolution that had promised democracy ultimately produced another form of dictatorship. The Cuban Revolution's influence extended far beyond Cuba's borders. It inspired revolutionary movements from Nicaragua to Angola, while also prompting counter-revolutionary responses from the United States and other Western powers. The revolution became a symbol of resistance to American imperialism for many in the developing world. In retrospect, the Cuban Revolution represents both the possibilities and limitations of revolutionary change. It demonstrated that small, determined groups could overthrow seemingly powerful governments, while also showing how revolutionary ideals could be compromised by the realities of governing and international pressure. The revolution's legacy continues to influence Cuban politics today. Fidel Castro ruled Cuba until 2008, when illness forced him to transfer power to his brother Raúl. The basic structure of the revolutionary government remains in place, though recent economic reforms have introduced limited market mechanisms. The Cuban Revolution stands as one of the most significant events of the 20th century, transforming not only Cuba but also Cold War dynamics and revolutionary movements worldwide. Its complex legacy continues to generate debate about the costs and benefits of revolutionary change and the relationship between social justice and political freedom. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the Cuban Revolution. Tomorrow, we'll be back with our Cultural Insights episode examining the Harlem Renaissance and its profound impact on African American culture and the broader American artistic landscape. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. What aspects of the Cuban Revolution do you find most significant or relevant to understanding modern political movements? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, I'm your guide for History Explained, where we believe that understanding yesterday is the key to navigating tomorrow.